The Line 6 Helix has proven itself to be a killer Swiss Army knife of a tool for musicians across the board. Specifically, worship musicians are drawn to this piece of gear, I think at least partially because of its ability to cover a broad range of sounds. So today I want to talk you through how I use mine for electric guitar and take you through my go-to Sunday morning patch. All right, so I want to talk quickly about why Helix, why modeling gear at all. But if you're here to hear sounds and see how I'm using my Helix, there are timestamps in the description below and you can jump to that section. I wanted to mention that I've kind of always been a modeling gear sort of guy, both with amp modeling and effects modeling. I've always really liked what they offer and what they can do for me. I've had a lot of tube amps and pedal board setups in the past, and I mean a lot. I've gone through a lot of gear, I think like a lot of you probably have. I've always kind of come back to modeling gear. I've had an XFX, I've had the Atomic Amps amplifier, I've had the HD series pod stuff. I've played around with the 11 rack. I've used Ableton with plugins before for electric guitar. I've been all over the place, but I seem to always come back to modeling gear. I had a buddy of mine one time tell me, you know, I like the way your modeler sounds, but to me it just kind of sounds like a really good guitar amp in a really good studio environment with great mics being played back through great monitors, and you're kind of hearing it in the next room. And I think he was saying that like he was missing that movement of air, like the guitar amp being in the room cranked and you feeling it sort of thing. And I get that, but for me, him saying that was like, yeah, that's I think what I love about modeling gear. In some ways, I've always preferred being on the control room side of things and kind of hearing my rig played back like it would be in a recording or in a live environment. And I think that's what I'm so drawn to about the Helix and things like it, is that what's coming out of the outputs of it is a final product. When it hits the preamps of the mixing board, it's kind of ready to go. And even the sound guy at the church I play with oftentimes says he doesn't touch those channels a lot. I mean, he's messing with them, but as far as getting really deep and changing the kind of core sound of what he's getting, he's not. But another thing that's always drawn me to modeling gear is its ability to give you a pro sort of setup without a pro budget. And what I mean by that is simply the ability to make one foot switch, accomplish a lot of things for you. And to get that same functionality in a traditional guitar setup, it would cost me a ton of money. And I know some of you are probably thinking, I don't know that it would, or at least that it would have to. But what I mean is, like, for me to have a pedal board where I can have a preset that's called swell, and it turns off a drive pedal, it turns on two delay pedals, and it changes patches on my reverb pedal. You can imagine it changes tempo on my delay pedal and changes presets on my delay pedal. You can imagine having that one switch on a really capable true bypass looper in a massive pedal board, even cabling. If I'm going to buy nice patch cables, it's going to cost me a couple $100 just in cabling. So for me to have the same functionality where one switch accomplishes a lot of things, it would be really, really expensive. And I think it's worth mentioning that the Helix isn't the only modeling rig that can do this. Most guitar modeling units that are on the market today have the ability to kind of make a lot of things happen in one switch, because I think it's an entire rig kind of built into one little unit. So I don't want you to feel like you have to spend $1,500 to get that usability or even to get the sound. I mean, the Helix is a really, really good sounding modeler, but like the Atomic amplifier, which I think is $600 brand new, or maybe $500 used, is capable of a lot of the same sort of things. All right, so as we get started, I did want to mention that I'm using my not so special Strat here, and this is a Mexican Strat. However, it's not a Fender standard Mexican Strat. It's a reissue of some 60s model, and it does have custom shop pickups in it, so you'll be hearing it for all of the demo today. And I'm coming out of both outputs, XLR outputs of the Helix, into two inputs on the Zoom H6, so you're hearing that. And when I am playing, you're not going to be hearing my microphone for my voice at all, so you won't be hearing any of the actual acoustic sounds from my electric guitar as we demo it. So that's what you'll be hearing for the demo. So we're in pedal board mode here, and you can see that I've got 10 switches that I can dedicate to effects. That's a setting in your Helix. And then I've got the other 2 switches on the far right. One is mode and one is tap. The mode switch is what we'll hit in a second to switch over to snapshot mode, which is where I basically stay all the time. I'm in pedal board mode so that I can walk you through each pedal and kind of show you what I'm using, and then we'll switch over to snapshot mode in a sec. I'm using the AC30 sort of clone. I think it's called the SX30 in Helix, and I'm going to bring that up here so that you can see what it looks like. There's my settings. It's pretty clean on its own, and it is going into an impulse response. And if you don't know about impulse response, oftentimes they're called IRs for short. You can read about those. I'll drop a link in the description below. And the impulse responses that I use are from a company called Ownhammer, and I bought their Class A Duo bundle, which gives you a ton of options. So many actually that they give you like a highlight folder where it's just like their favorite ones from the pack. And I ended up using kind of a blend. It's not something I did. They offer like blended speakers. And the one I went with is a VC15 or Vox AC15 Gold and a VC30 V3H blended together into one IR. And so I'm going to show you what just the amp and impulse response sounds like. To do that, I'm going to turn off this compressor first. It's a compressor that's always on, so I don't have it routed to a pedal. But this is the compressor off, just amp and impulse response. And then now what I'll do is I'll kick on the compressor because that's the thing that stays on all the time with the amp and cab. And I really wrestled with whether or not to buy an impulse response pack because they're not cheap. And I wasn't convinced that I couldn't get what I wanted out of the stock Helix cabs. And they do sound really, really, really good. But I kept reading about guys that were saying it's really the difference. There's a big difference when you use custom IRs. So I took the plunge and I bought the Ownhammer pack, and I haven't regretted it at all. They really do sound incredible, and it really is a totally different world than the stock cabs in the Helix. Again, they don't sound bad, but something about these IRs, it opens up and breathes. It feels a little bit more like that amp that's breathing and the tubes are sagging, and it's really, really, really killer. So the first drive pedal in my chain is the Tima, or I think it's the Timmy clone. And it's not super dirty. It's adding a little bit of top-end clarity and just a little bit of bite to the AC30. And here's what it sounds like. So here's amp alone again. And Timmy. The next pedal in my chain is the KWB drive. And I don't think there's a different name for the real pedal. I think the real pedal is called a KWB. And I love this pedal. It wasn't something I'd ever even heard of. I typically use a fuzz in this placement, which may sound weird, but a fuzz backed way off, where it's just a little bit of punch and compression and just a little bit of grit on top. But the KWB kind of does that same thing. So here's amp alone with the KWB. And then oftentimes it's paired with the Timmy too. I really never use the KWB for rhythm kind of stuff. It's almost always for like lead licks, and we'll get into that in just a second. The next pedal in the chain is the transistor tape. That's kind of an echoplex sort of delay, and here's what that sounds like. And I have that set up as my dotted eighth delay. So the mix is a little bit high, not a ton of feedback, but some nice modulation in there too, which is cool. So the next pedal in the chain is the vintage digital delay, and that's kind of an emulation of an old Eventide rack-mounted delay, and it sounds like this. I think the vintage digital probably has my favorite modulation of all the delays in the Helix, and it's really, really great. The next delay in the chain is the Elephant Man delay, and this one's set up really, really wet with lots of feedback. It's one of the main delays used for my swell patch, and this is like a clone of a Memory Man sort of delay. Yeah, the next pedal in the chain is the Simple Pitch pedal, and that is kind of my micropog sort of clone, and it does this really well. So I don't have any low octave, and I'll show you, I'll pull it up here. I don't have any low octave. I think it's all of the upper octave, and the mix is pretty low. This is one of those effects where you don't even necessarily hear it come in, but you feel it when it goes away. So it's more of a felt than heard sort of thing, but I think it adds just a little bit of pop to those lead sort of licks. So I use it almost always with drive. I don't think I ever used it without. So here it is. Let's see. This sort of thing. Here it is off, on, bridge pickup off, bridge pickup on, so I really dig that. So the next 4 pedals in the chain are reverb pedals. The way I have it set up is that 2 of those are a little bit less wet and with less decay, and then the other 2 are kind of full on really wet and modulated. And here's what some of those sound like. So obviously I do keep trails turned on all the time for all my delays and reverbs. And you'll also notice that I've got 1 delay and 1 reverb that aren't routed to a switch. And the reason I do that is because they only get turned on from a snapshot. So I'm not actually pressing a switch to turn them on. I'm pressing a snapshot switch that turns on and off a lot of things. So now's a good time to switch over to snapshot and take a look at that. To get to snapshot mode, I just hit my mode switch, and that gets me over to my snapshots, and I have 8 snapshots set up here. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, but I'm gonna walk you through what they are and what they're doing. The first snapshot is my chime drive snapshot, and this is kind of one of my go-to sounds for like big choruses, big bridges that just kind of have droning inversions of chords happening. So if you're doing this sort of thing, so it's just a bright, little delay, little verb, kind of generic worship sort of sound. The next snapshot that I have here is my light reverb and delay snapshot, and this is quarter note delay, and it's light in the context of worship music. So it's not super light, but I use it for sounds like this. The next snapshot that I have here is my heavy reverb and delay snapshot, and I use it for sounds like this. Next up is my dotted eighth note delay snapshot, and as you would guess, it sounds like this. My next snapshot is my dotted eighth and quarter note delay, and it sounds like this. My next snapshot is my dotted eighth with pitch, and this is using that micropog sort of sound with the octave up. A little bit of drive, a little bit of delay and verb. I'm going to use it for this sort of thing. The pitch quarter is the same thing, just with a quarter note delay instead of a dotted eighth. And the next snapshot is my swell snapshot. And this is demonstrating what I love so much about the Helix and gear like the Helix. This one foot switch is turning off a bunch of sounds and turning on a bunch of others. And I'm not tap dancing on a pedal board trying to make all this happen in the moment. And so here's what my swell snapshot sounds like. So those are my snapshots, and the way I use snapshots is I make each preset a song. So you'll see that preset 1A just says song 1 right now. When I've rehearsed for a Sunday morning, I'll actually call that whatever that song is, and the only thing I change from preset to preset is the name and the tempo. And what this allows me to do is when song 1 ends and song 2 is beginning, I just tap my preset switch, taking me to song 2, changing the tempo and having all the same sounds. I'll also save that preset with whatever patch I want it to start on. So it's the exact same sounds, it may just start on a different snapshot than the previous one did. So say for example, one song ends in my chime drive snapshot, I can change to the next preset, and if I've saved it to do this, it'll open in the new tempo with the new name, and it'll be on my swell snapshot instead, so I can swell into the beginning of the song. Well, that's how I use my Line 6 Helix, and hopefully watching this has helped you maybe take a new approach to using yours. If you like the sounds that you heard today, you can download this patch at theworshiptechtools.com, and there will be a link in the description below. If you're a worship leader and multi-instrumentalist at your church, the Helix can really be a Swiss Army knife, like I said earlier, of a tool. It has a great sounding mic pre, so you can process vocals completely separately from processing your guitar internally in the Helix. It's an 8-in, 8-output audio interface that can plug straight into your computer, including routing audio back out of your computer to dedicated outputs or the main outputs on the Helix. It's got great sounding effects for acoustic guitar, including the ability to host impulse responses, and there are some really good sounding IRs for acoustic guitar as well. It's really endless, the things that the Helix can do, including things like sending MIDI to your computer for changing lighting and slides and that sort of thing. I'm not paid by Line 6, and I'm not being sponsored or endorsed even just for this video to say those things. I genuinely believe that the Helix and even things like the Helix can really make what we do as worship leaders and multi-instrumentalists a lot easier. And hey, if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, if you like free downloads, and if you're curious at all about some exciting stuff I have coming out in this sort of show control, one thing does everything sort of vibe, Stick around and subscribe. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have questions, feel free to drop those in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video.